I do need you to kind of let me have the floor if that's okay. And I will take questions, but I want to get going just first because this is a fairly dense lesson. I want to get through it all, and I'd like to go through APA formatting at the end, which I keep saying I'm going to do, and then I keep seeing shiny objects. If you like, yeah.
It says 2.7.
Thank you. Welcome. All right. You keep them coming. So, sexual dimorphism and sex-linked traits. What is meant by the term sexual dimorphism? Okay. Sexual refers to biological sex, i.e. male and female. Di means what? Two. Morphos? No. We think that because we tend to use that, but actually, morphos just refers to shape. Two shapes, okay? And the basic idea is this, that organisms that are sexually dimorphic have two distinct sex cells. Yeah. Sorry? Okay, for sure. Absolutely. An example of this would be spermatozoa and eggs. What are the odds that I spell this correct? Spermatozoa and ova. It could also be seeds and pollen. That's bad. I'm mixing the male and female. That's okay, but that's fine. So we have two distinct types of sex cells. We also have two distinct body types. And again, the male and female body type. Now, to be clear, when we say distinct, that doesn't mean completely different, right? There are biologically male and biologically female people in this room, and of course, most of your body parts are very similar or exactly the same. Some of your body parts are similar but distinctly different, and some of your body parts are, well, that's an interesting question. Are some of your body parts completely different? I mean, you'd think that when you got down to the reproductive system, it seems very distinct, right? The male urogenital system is very seemingly different than the female urogenital system, right? Are they completely distinct from one another? And do we know? So when we have two distinct body types, it's important to keep in mind that we share most major features pretty much identically. There are different averages. For traits across the population. And this is a really important thing to keep in mind. For example, generally speaking, who are physically stronger, males or females? Males, undeniably. Does that mean that every male is stronger than every female? Of course not, right? There's some females who are like bodybuilders and will kick your ass. But it does mean that the average male is stronger than the average female. It also means that the strongest male is stronger than the strongest female. But again, that's a description at the population level. It tells you nothing about individuals. If you, had a curtain up and you said there's two people behind this curtain and one is male and one is female, who is stronger? Do you have enough information to answer confidently? No. Absolutely not. Now, if you have to play the odds, what's the safer bet, I guess? The male. But you're missing all kinds of information, right? So it's important to understand when we talk about different traits, male and female, it is exceedingly rare, and we'll talk about it, that we're talking about different traits. We're actually typically talking about the same traits with a spread of averages, right? On average, who has wider hips, males or females? Females. Does that mean that every female has wide hips? Of course not. Some females have very slender hips. Does that mean every male does not have wide hips? Of course not. Some of us pretty hippie. Right? So these things all exist along a spectrum. And that's very important information because as we're going to learn, when we talk about them having different traits, we're talking about variations on the same traits, even down to the urogenital system. Developmentally, every single body starts as a female body in the human. There is, and then everything that makes somebody quote unquote male is a variation on the female body type. They start to develop during developmental biology. The penis and the clitoris are the exact same structure in terms of the cells they start out as. And in somebody who is biologically male, that grows into the penis, which itself exists in a spectrum of sizes. And in people who are biologically female, that goes into the clitoris, which is along a spectrum of sizes. And there are some people who are determined at birth to have indeterminate sex because they fall outside of the normal range for either one of those. That's actually quite common. That happens in upwards of 1 in 10, 1 in 15 births, depending on which studies you look at. So it's a mistake to understand the male body type and the female body type as being two separate things. They are two variations on the same body plan, not in some kind of like philosophical sense, in an actual biological sense. And in somebody who's biologically male, the internal structures that are the vagina end up inside the penis, like as it elongates, the urethra and all these things, but they're the same structures that end up in different locations during developmental biology. Does that make sense? And that's a really important thing to understand because we're going to look at how sexual dimorphism comes about. And the one thing to understand is that it is somewhat complicated. When we talk about this, even though it is true, on average, who's taller, men or women? Men. On average, who has a higher body fat content, men or women? Women, yeah. On average, who has a higher body muscle composition? Who has denser bone composition as a rule? Men, yeah. Who has more body hair as a rule? Men. So all of those traits have averages. And again, none of these things is exact. Like my buddy Chris has never had to shave a day in his life, his face. And he is a 42-year-old male and he just does not get facial hair. I get facial hair, but I have like 6 hairs and they get really long and scraggly and I look like a prepubescent teenage boy, except it's going gray, which is depressing. But enough about me. So all of these things exist along a spectrum, right? And then my buddy Aaron, he had like a full beard at 13, like just thick. Like you could set your watch to he would shave and like by noon, like just beard. So all of these things exist along a spectrum. Does that make sense? That's going to be key. Having said that, normally, if you ask somebody to identify between male and female, they're not going to say, well, this person has a body fat composition of 7.25% and that person has one of 5.3. And they're typically not going to say, well, this person is this tall and that person's that tall. Normally, when we think of the difference between the male body type and the female body type, what things are we thinking about? Yeah. I mean, hopefully not thinking too much about the genitals. That'd be inappropriate. But yeah, we're thinking about...
How would you tell them apart?
Yeah. Now, having said that, like, I would imagine that you probably have a sense in this room of who is male and female, and presumably you haven't checked everyone's genitals out. So that's one of the things we look at. It's not the only one. We tend to look at what we call the primary sex characteristics, or the primary sex traits, and the secondary sex traits. So the primary sex traits are those that are related to the reproductive cycle.
When it says mean, it means like average?
Yes, that's correct, yeah. Yeah, mean is another way of saying average. Good question. So when we talk about the primary sex traits, we're talking about the urogenital system. We're talking about genitalia. But again, yeah.
I was just gonna ask why I turned the lights off because like I found
If that's helpful, yeah, absolutely. Go nuts.
I need my eyes to like try and focus because I
Sure.
cannot see.
Yeah, you bet. I'll try to write a little bigger. But the things we typically tend to find are what we call the secondary sex characteristics, or the secondary sex traits. What's another word for sexual maturity in the biological sense? My experience teaching high school is that people are very immature about sex. But in biology, when we talk about sexual maturity, it doesn't mean giggling every time I say testes. It means what? Sorry? Brain is part of what develops during this. Puberty. Very good. So like sexual maturity is puberty, right? Puberty is I should say post-puberty. Puberty is the process of coming to sexual maturity. And during that time, yeah, there's all sorts of changes hormonally, but those changes in the primary sex traits change, right? Like during puberty, obviously you tend to get growth of the genitals and things like that. But mostly that's just like the growth of the rest of the body, actually. The biggest change actually comes in the secondary sex characteristics, not to your genitalia during this time, but to the rest of your body, right? If you, aside from social norms, we tend to dress girls in dresses in pink and we let their hair grow long and we tend to cut boys' hairs and discourage them from painting their nails or whatever, and all these sort of little ingrained things. But in terms of body type, without looking at the primary sex traits, which if you're not the kid's parent, you definitely shouldn't be doing, you can't really tell whether a 6-year-old is male or female, right? Like there aren't a lot of distinctive things there. And as they approach puberty, as they begin to come to sexual maturity, the secondary sex characteristics start to differentiate, where for the average male and the average female, it becomes usually quite clear who's what. Now to keep in mind, of course, these things are on an average. Everything is on a bell curve, which means that if you are if this is maleness to femaleness.
Are we supposed to draw this?
No. If these are maleness and femaleness as such, then, the male population would exist along a curve like that, and the female population would exist along a curve like that. And of course, in this zone, the secondary sex characteristics don't necessarily tell you, right? There are a lot of people for whom the secondary sex characteristics are not all that clear on what someone is, right? And that's an important thing to keep in mind, that the biological definition of being male and female doesn't relate to what your hair looks like or what your body fat percentage is or whether your hips are wide. It's a question of plumbing, right? It's a question of which reproductive organs are present. That doesn't even begin to talk about all the people who have both or neither, or a single system that is sort of an amalgam between the two, all of which exist. So even the primary sex characteristics exist on a spectrum, right? Right? From, very large enlarged male genitalia to very small and unpronounced male genitalia to very small and unpronounced female genitalia, all the way up to very large and pronounced female genitalia, right? Like these things exist along a spectrum. And that's important to keep in mind, because again, like we said, something like anywhere between 2 and 10% of births, it's not determinate, and it depends on which studies you look at. It's not immediately clear, whether somebody is biologically male or female. That's important. Having said that, what are some of the secondary sex characteristics that tend to take difference? Like hip width is a typical indication. Breasts. Both male and females have breasts, right? But breast development, right? Typically speaking, females tend to develop larger breasts than men. Don't look at me. I'm breaking the trend there. I should eat a little less. It's true. What? I got news for you. Yeah, I'm a blossoming. I need to get like a training bra or something, or exercise, one or the other. And I'm really thinking training bra seems easier. Got to be honest. I get like a nice, cute one. I'd look good. Anyway, my understanding is pretty uncomfortable though, so maybe I should exercise. I don't know. Anyway, yeah. The secondary sex characteristics themselves aren't always, or in fact aren't typically functional as related to sex. In other words, the size of a woman's breasts have nothing to do with their function, right? Their function is they are glandular, right? Like they secrete milk, which nourishes baby. There's actually no relation between the effectiveness with which they do so and the size of breasts. The size of breasts is a secondary sex characteristic, but it's not related to their function necessarily. Likewise, being taller or shorter has nothing to do with the function of one's genitalia.
Excuse this interruption. If you have flourish with you, could you please come to guide it?
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you. I see a few hands here. Yeah.
So with that, because in pregnancy, don't they like grow? Or is that a...
Yeah. So everyone's breasts will grow when they begin lactating, because the actual glandular tissue will start to be activated and include milk. But again, that is relative to their starting size, right? And by the way, men, your breast tissue fully functional with the right hormone treatment, you too can lactate. So something to think about. If that's an activity that's really important to you, you got all the right bits. They'll do the job. Yeah. Sorry, one sec. I'm trying to hear a question. Yeah. Yeah, now that is very much a primary sex trait. That is related to your reproductive system. We'll talk next unit about the reproductive system and what is happening during menstruation. You've probably learned about before, but that is a primary sex trait. But the fact that you have wider hips as a rule is not. That's a secondary sex trait. Breast development, height, body fat, hair patterns, voice. Typically speaking, what is the general trend? Who has a higher voice? Generally speaking, women have a higher voice. Who has a lower voice? Typically men. Is that always true? Does every man have a lower voice than every woman? Of course not. But who has the highest voice of all? Presumably a woman. By the way, before puberty, no relation whatsoever. Ever heard of boys' choir? Absolutely beautiful, stunning, right? Like these beautiful boys' choirs that sing. It's hard being a boy if you learn to sing, because you learn how to sing, and all of a sudden one day you wake up and your voice has totally changed on you, and now you don't know how to sing anymore. It sucks. I went through that. Yeah.
Is that trying to say the word height?
I would say it is succeeding at saying the word height. Yeah.
Sam Kenny, do you have anything for me?
I do. There's some tests back there. Kate Odette started them, but I'm not marking them per se. I'm looking through, and if they know what they're doing. Kate, could you give her a 30-second briefing on those tests back there? Amazing. Thank you. Don't worry, you'll have time. Okay. All right. Shh. Now, sex determination is a really interesting thing. A really interesting thing. Oh, what the heck? Patterns! So sex determination is an offspring male or female. And I don't mean like, do we think that, but rather biologically, what makes some offspring male and some female happens in different ways for different species, which is really interesting. Sometimes it just has to do with the temperature of the egg during development. So for a lot of reptiles, this is actually how sex determination happens. And those eggs that are in the middle of the clutch and tend to be better insulated stay warm, and they tend to be one sex. And the ones on the outside that tend to be cooler tend to be another sex. Yes?
Isn't it true that like some people have like more probability to birth a girl than a guy or other way around, or is that just
That is definitely true, and it could be for a number of different reasons. Boy, the reproductive system of humans is extremely complex, like extremely complex. And so there are so many factors at large. But yes, and right down to in females, I don't know much about it. In males, there are dietary things that can make because sex determination in humans, we'll get to in a minute, is entirely determined by the father. A mother always passes along the X chromosome, and it is the father who passes on either the Y or the X chromosome. And there's indication that like the temperature of the genitalia can make a difference to which sperm thrive and survive better and get produced more, and like health conditions and diseases and diet and all sorts of things. So there's interesting factors. But you are the biological sex you are because of the sperm that your father provided. Your mother provided one of your X chromosomes for sure. So if you're like, I'm a man and I resent it, you can blame your father. And if you're a woman and you resent it, you can blame your father. And as a father, that feels appropriate. Yeah. No, that's okay. Yeah, you use the word gender, and this is where we got to watch out, because gender is a sociological term. So gender, and these get used in day-to-day life as synonyms, right? Gender is a behavioral term. And that doesn't mean it doesn't have meaning or value. In fact, we talk about gender, though in animals we call it sexual behaviors, but it's the same idea. Gender is a question of sort of how do we behave, right? And sex refers to biology, and even that is complicated enough. So I'm not like getting after it all about that, but just to be aware that these are words we have to use carefully, because gender refers to something outside of the biology of genetics that we're talking. I mean, it's not entirely outside of genetics, right? Because part of how we think about gender is behaviors that some we label as masculine and some we label as effeminate. And obviously some of that must be genetic. But even still, it has nothing to do with your genitalia, right? Well, even that's not fair, because it does have something to do with your genitalia, right? Because part of our definition of gender, at least historically, traditionally has always been that part of being male is having a penis, and part of being female is not having a penis. And I use that language very pointedly because throughout most of human history, our definitions of things have been pretty man-centric, right? Like they've been sort of based around it being a man's world, which is also something that has, I'm sure, not at all changed completely, and I'm sure you guys can speak to that much more than I can if you're a woman and have experienced life on Earth as a woman. But I can say that in my lifetime, the way we treat gender has changed dramatically, right? So it's hard to disentangle those two things. Here we're talking about the biology, and it's kind of a touchy, it shouldn't be a touchy subject. In fact, quite the opposite. You're going to find that as it relates to gender, biology does not, anyone who tells you that biology, if their appeal to having a problem with trans kids is, well, you're either biologically male or female, I would invite them to take a grade 11 biology class where you're going to learn that's not true at all, right? Like just biological sex is so profoundly confusing. So anyone who appeals to science to tell you that they have a problem with trans, with people being either transgendered or transsexual or any of the above, just has no idea what they're talking about with regards to science. Because the first thing you'll learn in science is that everything exists on these intersecting average curves of values. Nothing fits into binary categories in science. In biology, it just doesn't at all. It's just not the way the biological world works. It's way too complicated. And that's what we're talking about here. If you are an alligator, what determines whether you're a male alligator or a female alligator was how hot your egg was while you were in there busy growing. And if you change that temperature, you can completely control the gender of a clutch, right? That's not how it works for us. It can be related to genetics, like us. It can be chromosomal. It can be environmental. But in any case, no matter how it's controlled, in any case, Animals have a basic default female body plan. And the male is a variation. So the male body is a variation on the primary and secondary sex characteristics of the female body plan. And in all cases, hormone levels during development determine these traits. And this is where you have to be mindful. So if somebody's chromosomes are such that they should be biologically male, but they were exposed in utero to high levels of a female sex development hormone. What's the primary female sex hormone? Estrogen. What's the primary male sex hormone? Testosterone. If your genes say, hey, you're male, but you weren't exposed to the normal levels of testosterone that a male normally develops to, you will not develop the male body plan, regardless of what your genes say. The genes do not control sex. They control what hormones get released, and it is hormone levels during development that determine these traits. And the two major ones are estrogen and testosterone. So if you are an alligator, what temperature regulates is the balance of estrogen to testosterone. Does that make sense? And that's how temperature determines whether the egg will be male or female. If you are human, what determines whether your developing body releases testosterone at key points or estrogen at key points in certain levels is on a chromosome. And you know which chromosome it's on. What chromosome is it on? In humans. The information to say, hey, be male is found on the 46th chromosome, which is either an X chromosome or a Y chromosome. If you're female, you have 2 copies of the X chromosome. If you're biologically male, you have a copy of the X chromosome and you have a copy of the Y. I shouldn't say biologically. If you're chromosomally male, you have a copy of the X chromosome and a copy of the Y chromosome. But again, this is the misunderstanding. Every single person in this room has all the genes to produce a penis. They're not on the Y chromosome. Every single person in this room has all the genes to produce testicles. They're not on the Y chromosome. Every single person in this room has the genes to produce a vagina and fallopian tubes and large mammary glands and all those things. All those genes exist in everyone. The Y chromosome does not contain the genetic information to make you male. That's found on all the other chromosomes, all spread out all over the place in all kinds of genes. The Y chromosome has basically one gene on it, a gene called SRY, and that gene during development gets read and says, hey, we're going to release a bunch of testosterone, and the release of that testosterone encourages the production of secondary sex characteristics and primary sex characteristics that make you biologically male. But the information on how to make a male body is inside everyone's genes, which means that at time of development, when you were a small embryo and then a fetus, every one of you could have been the other gender with no gene therapy or anything like that, just with exposure to different hormone levels. Does that make sense? This is also why people can transition sexually as adults undergoing hormone therapy. They can't do so fully and completely non-surgically because they're post-pubescent. They've already developed sexually, and so there's surgery required to remove traits that have already grown and whatever. But the majority of your biological function can indeed transition from one sex to the other because it is hormonally regulated. Each of you has inside you all the genes you would need to be both male and female. Does that make sense? It also means that if your hormones end up in a sort of unnormal And normal in biology has a meaning. It doesn't mean good or bad. It's not normative in that sense. Normal just means most common. So if you happen to end up with a non-normal balance of testosterone and estrogen, it is possible for babies to be born with both sets of secondary sex or primary sex characteristics. There are plenty of babies born who have both a penis and a vagina, and then surgical decisions are made. And it used to be that surgical decisions would be made the day of birth in the hospital, and the overwhelming trend now is to let children grow a bit, and before any surgical decisions are made, to sort of get a sense of their personality and maybe have them be a part of the choosing process. People don't normally wait until post-puberty, but at least to get a sense of what we would like their biology to match their gender. That's a new example of something we call gender-affirming care, and something that you hear a lot of controversial talk about. But you could imagine that if you're born with both sets of genitalia, you might not just like that your parents just made a random decision to lop one off and leave the other, rather than give you a chance to grow and kind of decide what kind of person you are. The trend is shifting more towards letting people grow, right? But there's a lot of confusion there, right? There's a lot of biological confusion, to say nothing of gender, which is obviously a whole level on top of biology, because gender has to do with expectations, I had the good fortune to be born a man. I don't know anything different, though I'm getting there. But, and I happen to be pretty happy with that arrangement. It seems like a pretty good life to me, I don't know. I've never been female. I don't know. I can imagine that if I would, especially if I grew up in a culture that said maybe, hey, you're not supposed to talk, or you don't get the same job opportunities, I might think, I'm not sure I'm into this. Or you have to submit to your husband, and someone else might think that's exactly what I want to do with my life. But I can't picture myself submitting to my husband. I'm too busy submitting to my wife. But she's a tough lady, Britt. No, but you know what I mean? So you can imagine when you add in this next layer of gender, which is cultural expectations. Oh, you were born with wide hips and breasts? Oh, you better get in the kitchen is the kind of nonsense you hear. You can imagine somebody going well, I want nothing to do with that whatsoever, right? So differentiating sex and gender is important, but even just the sex side of it, even just the mechanical bits, even just the plumbing is not cut and dry. And anyone who tells you it is doesn't know what they're talking about. And I really want to hit that because it's important. You'll hear a lot of nonsense. And this science to me is an apolitical thing. Science has nothing to do with politics. It's just a matter of us trying to understand how the world around us works. And we have an obligation to try and learn how it works and try and report how it works honestly. But then when you go out into the world and you engage in politics, when you engage in the world around you and you make decisions for people's lives, well, you hear a lot of people trying to make decisions for people who've, been born a certain way and they know nothing about it. And it's never going to affect them. It's not going to affect some 75-year-old white guy who's, making decisions for people they know nothing about, whose experiences they can't relate to. And I think that is supremely important. So by all means, develop your political views however you want to develop them. But my advice would be, in as much as they interact with science, take the time to learn what the science actually says about a subject before you develop whatever your political views may be, at which point, you do you. I saw a couple of hands back here. Flourish? I don't know. Can you?
May I eat?
May you eat. You may eat. May you never interrupt me mid-lesson again to ask if you may eat. Before is good. And, if we're not doing a lab, I trust you to make that decision yourself. But thank you for asking. And yes, you may eat. Yes.
I was going to ask you about the meeting to choose, and I was going to ask if there was ever a time, which, I don't know if you know, where that caused, any health issues. So I feel like having both could cause something in the future.
My wife would be the person to talk to. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. My wife would be the person to talk to because my wife is a midwife, right? So she's delivered babies. And she's had plenty of babies of indeterminate gender. And so I know she had training in that. I will ask her and get back to you because I don't know the answer to that. I do know that there's a whole set of guidelines. In Canada, we have our own regulatory body, but in the United States, they are kind of the biggest in the world and really the most advanced. They're a very good regulatory body is the SOGC, the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. And they have a set of recommendations on how to handle situations like that, which are always being updated based on sort of the best and most recent available evidence. And so when my wife was training, they were transitioning into it was not brand new. It was new enough that for a lot of professors, they'd sort of been trained in an old system where the advice was to make a decision day of, and sort of now have moved into a system where they found that's time to wait. Certainly prepubescently, your genitalia don't do much prepubescently. Obviously, they're involved in urination, right? Because we have this kind of double system where our sex organs and our ureter kind of come out of the same basic place. But the sex organs themselves, prepubescently, aren't really doing anything. And it's at puberty that they activate. So that would certainly be a big factor. But I will ask for a better answer to that question because it's a good one. Any other questions before we kind of move on there? Oh, I'm sorry, Aiden, yes.
What causes a hormonal imbalance?
Oh, all kinds of things. We will do a whole unit on what's called your endocrine and your exocrine system. So your endocrine system releases hormones in your body. Your exocrine system releases pheromones out in the world around you. But both of these are chemical signals that sort of instruct your body what to do. Or in the case of your pheromones, they're chemical signals you release that instruct other people's bodies what to do. Right? Which, whether you're aware of the science of it or not, you're extremely aware of the results of it being a teenager, right? Because your own hormones have shifted dramatically in the last bunch of years, right? And so you're discovering sex drive, and you're discovering moodiness, and you're discovering all sorts of like broad emotional changes. And your hormone system is controlled in part by your brain and in part by the glands throughout your body. And all kinds of things can change that, right? Diet can affect how those things work. Sleep levels is a huge one, and teenagers are famously terrible about sleep patterns and things like that. But part of it is just your body, prepubescently, your hormone levels are pretty steady. And then postpubescently, you have a hormone cycle, right? And women are people who are biologically female are keenly aware of their hormone cycles because for most of them, it either does or doesn't end in menstruation monthly and cramps and pain and all these things. So they have sort of a daily reminder of the cyclical nature of their hormones. But postpubescent males also have hormone cycles, and there's all sorts of things that can throw those out of whack and out of balance because they're real physical structures in your body that are releasing these and absorbing these and responding to these. And like any other structure in your body, they respond to being sick. They respond to how much you eat. They respond to how much you sleep. They respond to the weather. They respond to the mood. And then on the pheromone side of it, the people all around you are releasing hormones called pheromones, but the same kinds of chemicals out into the world, and those affect you as well. So, if you're biologically male and straight and girl walks in the room, like there's actually a release of pheromones that your body does react to. And the opposite to that, if you're gay or if you're biological female and straight, right? Like you are in a sea of chemicals that are telling your body how to react all the time. It's complicated. Biology is very complicated. Yes. How's your food? Is it good? Mm-hmm. Good. What can I do for you? Is it about food or is it about this?
It's about, I guess, this.
Excellent.
Okay. So, you're saying like a child can have like two genitals. What if like you cut one of their genitals, but like they have like testosterone?
Yeah, happens all the time. And that is, especially historically, this is where a lot of trans people discover after the fact that they had no idea that they were born with indeterminate genitalia and their parents made a decision, and it seems to have very much been the wrong one to match sort of their hormonal balancing and their experience of their own sexuality and gender. That is not by any stretch of the imagination the only reason people can become transgendered or feel like they have what we call gender, why am I blanking on the word, dysphoria, where they feel as though their gender doesn't match their experience of how they feel. But that can certainly be one factor, absolutely. Yeah, right? Like, how do you know? And I think doctors were well-meaning and parents were well-meaning, and they didn't want their child to feel other or to feel weird or to feel whatever, different from others. So they made a decision in that moment. And what we're learning, first of all, anyone who's been through elementary school knows that no matter what you do, you're going to feel different and weird and other and awkward in elementary school because elementary school is a hellish pit that nobody should ever have to experience. But the second thing you discover is that, like, you can't just make that decision when somebody's a child. And I'll say it as like a pretty effeminate male, right? Like as somebody who, and less so in my sort of adulthood where I'm just slowly becoming my own father. But like when I was a kid, I was a pretty effeminate male. And like everybody assumed I was gay. I wasn't, but people assumed I was. And in the 90s, it was, not a friendly place to be gay or to be thought of as gay. But like, it was always very frustrating to me that like I was male, but I didn't fit into those kind of broad categories of what people considered to be stereotypically male, right? Like I was terrible at sports. I wasn't very aggressive. I liked poetry and I liked science fiction books and, and music, right? Like that was just my experience. And again, there's nothing biological about that whatsoever. Like when you're talking about those things, you're not talking about genitalia, right? Like it's not about that. It's about the cultural experience that we call gender that we've lopped onto this biological thing, which is on some level makes a lot of sense, right? Because male and female is a major biological difference. So it absolutely makes sense that we have, developed a culture where those people have major experiences. On the other hand, as anyone can tell you, for most of human history, whether you were male or female or not, determined whether you could own property or not. Well, that's pretty stupid. There's nothing biological about that. For a long time, whether you were male or female or not determined whether you could vote or not. Well, that's pretty stupid. There's no reason for that. My mother-in-law went to get a loan when she was younger, and they made her bring her husband and sign for it, right? Like she wasn't allowed to get a loan on her own, despite owning a farm, right? And it was her farm. It was her family farm, right? That's pretty stupid. Those things have nothing to do with biology, right? Those things are purely gender. Those things are purely sociological. Having said that, typically speaking, the sex chromosomes determine biological sex in, high 90s% of cases, probably 99% of cases. So most of you, if you had your genetics tested, your genetics would match, your chromosomes would match your experience, right? If you have a penis and testicles and, you're probably going to discover that you have a Y chromosome. And if you don't, and instead you have ovaries and a uterus, you're probably going to discover that you have two X chromosomes. But no guarantee. There are a percentage of people who, get biologically tested and discover that actually they are chromosomally male despite being fully biologically female. It happens. So they're chromosomally female despite being fully biologically male. It happens. But in most cases, this is how it works. The X chromosome is the 23rd chromosome. It's pretty small. It has a few thousand genes on it. And they're mostly unrelated to sex. All right, so it is not as though all of the genes to produce ova and ovaries and the uterus and whatever are all found on the X chromosome. It's not like that at all. It's just a regular chromosome like all the other ones. Pretty small one, but it's just a standard chromosome that has a few thousand genes on it that code for a bunch of stuff. The Y chromosome is a degenerated copy of the X. We can tell that it historically was an X chromosome, but it has fell into disuse, and because it's fallen into disuse, it's been able to mutate without causing harm, and so it has mutated and it is actually degraded. It's much smaller. But even more to the point, it contains only a handful of working genes. Notably, one called SRY. The thing to know is that there can't be any important genes that your body needs, that everybody needs on the Y chromosome, because women don't have one, right? So it is not a chromosome full of any important genes. And again, you might think, oh, well, it must just contain all the genes to make all the male bits. But again, that's not how it works, actually. Everybody contains all those genes. Instead, it contains this gene SRY. And SRY doesn't code for testicles or penis or spermatozoa or any of that nonsense. SRY activates testosterone release during development. This is an oversimplification. You'd have to take a developmental biology class to really get into the nitty-gritty of this. But the short version is this SRY gene activates testosterone release during development. And this typically results in male sex characteristics. Barring a chromosomal abnormality, some of which you may be studying. Is anyone studying Klinefelters or XXY or XXX or any of these for their project? Anyone? There's some cases where some people have 3 copies of the X chromosome, XXX. That results in abnormalities. There's some people who are XXY. That results in abnormalities. There's some people who just have a lone X. That results in abnormalities. But typically, there's just 2 possible arrangements. Only 2 possible, right? I should say 2 standard. I'm going to say normal. Normal is the term. And again, I can't stress enough, we sometimes bump on the word normal because in our day-to-day life, it feels like calling somebody abnormal is an insult. But in biology, normal simply means like, the thing that 95% of organisms have. So there's 2 normal chromosomal arrangements. And they are XX, in which case they lack the SRY gene. So they tend to have low testosterone at development. It's going to sound like an ad on a Joe Rogan podcast, but we'll just say low T. And we'll say typically female. That's my first Joe Rogan reference of the year. Oh, come on now.
He's not my cup of tea.
He's not, I say that, I've actually never listened to a podcast, but to me, Joe Rogan, from what I've seen clips, and he seems like he seems like a million guys like I've played a sport with and then had a beer with after, and like they have a lot of big opinions, and that's fine. And it's totally fine. And then you get this thing, what if you had that guy who seems like a perfectly nice guy with a lot of big opinions, and then all of a sudden, like, millions of people listened to him and took him really seriously? Mm-hmm. And I just think, like, that's not his fault. It really isn't his fault. He's just a guy with big opinions. It really is our society's fault where, like, when you want an opinion on, like, the economy, we should have trained you guys if you've gone through school and we're doing our job. And I would tell you, I don't think we are doing our job terribly well. But if you've gone through school and you've been well educated and you want to know something about how the economy should work, your instinct should be like, I should read what economists think about that. And then if you want to know about like how a sports team should be run, you should like think like, oh, I should like look at like people who manage sports. And if you want to know about vaccinations, you should look at an epidemiologist, not even a doctor. It's interesting. Like whenever they're talking about vaccines and stuff, they always pull a doctor on TV and they're like, I'm a doctor. And it's like, well, that's not the person to ask. The person to ask is a virologist, right? Like, or an epidemiologist, the people who study the spread of disease. So like we should be so I just think Joe Rogan seems like a nice guy. And like, listen, if you give me a microphone and $100 million and say, people want to hear what you think about, who the Toronto Blue Jays should start tonight, I'll talk about who the Toronto Blue Jays should start tonight and what the lineup should be and all the strategy. Am I a smart person to ask that? No, but it wouldn't make me a bad guy for having opinions about it, right? You watch sports, people, everyone has opinions. So I don't know much about Joe Rogan. From what I've seen, he actually seems like I get why people want to like go on his show and hang out. He seems like a chill guy if you're into like that kind of stuff. And And he seems like a chill hang. And I get why people might want to listen to that, because it seems like, hey, here's this guy who seems like a chill hang, and he gets every person I'm into, like all my favorite athletes, all my favorite musicians, all my favorite whatever, and they hang out and they talk about stuff. It's just when it gets to the next stage of like, then if they tell you like the moon landing was faked, I'd be like, I don't really know if you're the guy to know that.
Yeah.
I don't know if he thinks the moon landing was faked. Does anyone know?
He just has a lot of big like opinions on like political things, and then makes everyone like because this isn't stereotyping at all.
No, that's fine.
But
I mean, it might be. Let me say, that's a lot like when somebody says, listen, I'm not racist, but...
No.
Or no offense.
No offense, but
Let me
God,
say,
Orlando, like, exercise. No, but sorry, go.
Young boys are very like young, like not like our age, like young, are
Yeah.
very like keen to like picking one person and then taking all.
Of course,
the
yeah,
things.
of course.
And that's not usually a good thing.
Like, I think that's always kind of dangerous, right?
Yeah.
Like, where when you're a young kid, I don't know about you, but my experience was at any given point, one person like was my personality,
Yeah.
right? But like when I was a kid, you didn't really know anything about those people, and you saw them in a movie, on a show, and like what you did know was very stage managed by like their managers, and there was this kind of cultural expectation that people would be quote unquote good role models, and so it tended to be a pretty harmless thing. But, and again, back to the thing about big opinions. Let me tell you something about opinions. Opinions are a lot like anuses, which is like everybody has one, but I think it's generally rude to share them in public, And, right? And so I think if you thought of all of your opinions as being a lot like your anus, you might pause before you're like, I'm going to show this to the whole room right now. You know what I mean?
Some people.
And I know it's kind of rich me saying that because I think I have a lot of big opinions, but I hope you'd note that most of my big opinions, I start off by saying, what do I know? And I end by saying, what do I know? And I try to say, what do I know, a lot in the middle. And I think it's really important to know that the difference between somebody's opinion and somebody's opinion that you should think about listening to is a whole lot of expertise, right? And so for me, it doesn't bother me that Joe Rogan has big opinions. Again, like, go play pickup hockey and hang out with the guys after. Every one of those guys has big opinions. And I haven't done a lot of like hanging out with like large groups of women, but I imagine they mostly have large opinions too, right? I think humans have opinions, right? Like, it's just a part of human nature. But I think that like you should be very wary about taking people's opinions seriously, because in the end, what do they know? And again, if you want to know about fixing your car, don't ask Joe Rogan, go to the mechanic. And if you want to know about, getting a sickness treated, go see a doctor. Maybe go see 3, compare 3 of their opinions. But don't go see 2 doctors and like your cousin Larry, who's like, you're fine, put some dirt on it, right? Like, because Larry doesn't know what he's talking about, right? Unless Larry's a surgeon or something, right? Yes.
What does that word say before female? Does it say typically or historically?
Typically.
Yeah,
Typically.
I do. Thank you.
Riley really wants you to talk about the X and Y. Thank you.
So these are the chromosomes themselves, right? So your 45th and 46th chromosomes, if one is X and one is Y, now you have the SRY gene, and now you have high testosterone at development, and that will typically result in a male body. And that's it. That is the total, the sum total of what the Y chromosome does. There's a couple other genes on there that do minor stuff that are involved in sort of secondary sex traits, but very little. It's largely, and it is degrading. The Y chromosome with each passing generation is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and the math shows that we're actually not that many generations away from there not being a Y chromosome, which again is not some big deal. There's plenty of other animals that don't have a chromosome that determines sex, and they still have 2 sexes, and they still successfully mate and procreate and pass things on. So your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandkids, all your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandsons, and all of their sisters will all have, no Y chromosome, and they will still, they'll figure it all out. It is not the mechanism by which there is male and female. It is the mechanism by which that is determined during development. Yeah.
So I have a question on like if they're born with like clothes.
Sorry? Yeah?
Because what if like they choose like the wrong one and then like they don't have to reproductive?
Yeah. No, I don't want to speak to this because I don't know too much. And again, I'll ask my wife and I'll do some reading tonight. Many people who are born sexually indeterminate also tend to suffer with fertility issues. So it is often the case that people on either end of sort of the extreme spectrum of maleness or femaleness struggle with fertility. And lots of people struggle with fertility, right? And that's not the only reason to struggle with fertility. So like if a huge percentage of the population struggles with being able to produce ova, and often for people who are intersex or people who are of indeterminate sex, there are repercussions for long-term fertility. But I mean, keep in mind, there's all kinds of things have repercussions for long-term fertility, right? Like as a woman, if you have too low a body fat content for too long a time, again, there's a natural distribution. But for people who are working very hard to keep their body fat content low, because for some reason our society has decided right now that that's what quote unquote attractive looks like, which is something that changes generation through generation, that has major effects on fertility. Physical activity levels have effects on fertility. Diet has effects on fertility. Sleep. The father determines the chromosomal sex of the offspring. Because mom must be XX if she's a fertile female. And so she's either going to pass on an X chromosome or she's going to pass on an X chromosome. But dad is XY, so he is either going to pass on an X chromosome or a Y chromosome. So all things being equal, what is the probability of having a female offspring or a male offspring? All things being equal, it's 50-50. But if it's not 50-50, that has nothing to do with mom and has everything to do with dad. Also just random chance, right? Families are small, and so there's low events. In my mother's family, it went boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. And then when they had, just 6, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. And then when they had grandchildren, it went boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, until my cousin Emma messed up and she was a girl first. That's just totally random. That's just random chance. There wasn't some like universal, every other kind of thing. Yeah.
So you said that your chromosomes don't always match your primary sex.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a chance that the dad could be XX and then you have all the kids be
an XX dad, I'm very confident. I'm not 100% confident, but I'm quite confident. Overwhelmingly, people with chromosomal sexual abnormalities or people with mismatch between their chromosomal and biological sex tend to be infertile. So I would think that would be very unlikely. I don't want to say it's impossible because, again, biology is so complex, but that would be exceptional. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, the thing you have to remember is like if you flip a coin, there is a famous thing you can do where you ask a class to half of the people in the class actually flip a coin 100 times and write it down, and then you ask the other half to make it up. And as a teacher, it's fun because you can always tell exactly who made it up. And do you know why you can tell who made it up? Because they're really afraid to put like 6 heads in a row or like 8 tails in a row. Because they think, random must mean it must be pretty much every other. But in real life, when things are random includes a long stretch of the same thing. Humans are very bad at detecting when things are random because we are very prone to find patterns. Random things have lots of pseudo patterns in small numbers. So when something is a 50-50 chance, if you then do it 1,000 times, you'd expect it to be within 20 of 500 of each, right? If you do it 1,000,000 times, you'd expect it to be within 1,000 of each, right? And so it starts to get really close to 50 and 50%. But if you only do something twice, it wouldn't be remotely crazy to say it's 50-50 chance, I flipped it and I got 2 heads. Like there's nothing crazy about that. That's just chance. Do you know what I mean? It's not common, but you gotta think, like when you say there hasn't been a female in the family, now, it could be something else, but it could also be chance. If you don't, we're not going to get to sex-linked traits today, and that's okay. But we are going to put the first sentence of sex-linked traits today. Sorry if I'm going a bit slow with this, but I think it's an interesting topic. And I think it's a very germane topic right now. So I think it's worth understanding well. Everyone in this room will interact with your sex and gender over the course of your life. Both interact with your sex in terms of like sexuality, right? Like you're stepping into that stage of your life at some point in the next, either already or in the next few years, but also with cultural expectations of people of your sex and gender and all these things. And I think, no generation has sort of heard more talk about this, but maybe that's why it's good to step back and start to differentiate what is politics from what is schoolyard bullying, from what is biology, from what is sociology, and think about it a bit clearly. Yeah.
Okay, it's like my step family for like 4 generations. It's basically been like all guys with like one single woman. Is that just by chance?
It could be. It could also be, I mean, like I said, it's this weird thing where there's some studies that show like that if guys wear tighter pants, they're more likely to have high sperm counts of X chromosomes than Y. So, I mean, it could literally be how they dress. It could be the work they do. Do they work in a saddle or like on a tractor chair versus, like, seriously, there's all kinds of things at play. So it could be random. It could also be related to something. Biology is so complicated. That's the answer to everything from this moment on in the rest of this course. Now that we're talking about human systems, the answer to every question is yes, asterisk, yes, star, but biology is complicated. Yes, go.
What is SRI?
SRY is a gene. It's a gene found on the Y chromosome. I will show you. Well, no, it doesn't mean everyone's body produces testosterone. Females produce testosterone as well. They just produce less of it as a rule. Yep. So look here. The SRY gene. So it's the sex-determining region Y protein. There it is. This is a tiny little protein. It is not a big deal. But it's a DNA binding protein, also known as a gene regulatory protein or a transcription factor, encoded by the SRY gene, and it's responsible for the initiation of male sex determination in theory in mammals. The theriforms. This is a subclass of mammals. It excludes the egg-laying mammals, of which I think there's only one surviving. Placentals. And marsupials. No. And there is its location on the Y chromosome. The Y chromosome is a real small thing. It does not have much going on. If you look at the male Y chromosome, there it is, and it's mostly junk DNA. Remember, the Y chromosome is mostly a corrupted version of the X chromosome. This, by the way, is a real picture. This is called a karyotype, and this is what you do when you pull the DNA out of a cell. You can then take photographs of it and then group them into the chromosomes. We're going to do an activity like that in a couple of days. And yeah, with a 30% difference, the Y chromosome is one of the fastest evolving parts of the human genome, and that's because it's mostly unused junk DNA, which means when it mutates, it doesn't kill the person, it just doesn't do anything.
Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah. So these are the genes of the Y chromosome, and if you look, SRY, and then there's some paralogs of genes found on the X chromosome. So ubiquitin protease, a helicase, histone demethylase. These are just standard boring things.
A lot of stuff is recent. 2020.
Yeah, men, do you know, this is something to mention. Do you know that if you're a smoker, you increase the risk as you age of the stem cells, your stem cells losing their Y chromosome. And all of a sudden you can find that all of your new cells are Y depleted. It's called mosaic Y loss. So something to be mindful of. Don't smoke, don't vape. And wear sunscreen.